Thanks, Ruxandra. I think I gave a lengthy presentation at the beginning of the previous session, but one thing I want to reiterate here is that it's very important that we see the whole value chain here, and this is obviously an expression we like to use in the industry, but the end point is the patient. So if we don't secure that the progress in basic research in genomics, whatever it may be, is translated into something which benefit the patient, better diagnostics, better treatment, better prevention, you name it, we have failed. So this is why it's so important that when we look into investment in this area, that we secure that things actually move through the value chain to the benefit of patient, and not only in Europe, it has to be with a global perspective. And this is actually what I would like to emphasize and then hand over to the next panelist.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, Ruxandra mentioned the tremendous cost of the brain diseases, just short of 800 billion. And to put that into context, that's more than is spent on cancer, plus diabetes, plus cardiovascular. It is an enormous amount of money and rising. And I think that what the concern is that this incredible organ, the brain, is actually managing those other diseases. And already there is evidence that the diabetic patients, when they become depressed, they get muddled and over their medication, they miss hospital appointments, and then, of course, all the terrible complications of diabetes follow, the amputation and loss of sight. So this is not just about the brain, it's about its capacity of managing other diseases, the comorbidities, the polypharmacy, all that's following, because we all know that once we reach that age of 65, there will be at least 3 other diseases moving on us. So this is very complicated. Now let's just look at the mechanisms that we have in our society. These clinical trials, they're 50 years old. Are they really reflecting our real world? I think not. I think it's Peter Pedersen who said that of all the human beings who've ever been on this globe, who've reached the age of 65, 2/3 are on it now. And yet, what do we do with the clinical trials? We exclude anybody who is over 65. What are we doing about our young women and pregnancy? Since the terrible thalidomide tragedy, they have been excluded, very understandably, from the clinical trials. But because of good progress with pharmaceutical products, with good, better understanding from our clinicians, diagnosis of illnesses are being made much earlier. Epilepsy, bipolar, schizophrenia. Young women are on medication for a very long time. But of course, with the economic downturn, a lot of women are putting off getting pregnant. So pregnancies are started later. What is the effect of that medication on the unborn fetus? What effect is that having on the ability to conceive when you want? None of this is being looked at. And yet these are real pressures within society. What about the actual regulatory process itself? 8 years in development, and then when you come to EMA, because of those tight exclusion criteria, back it goes to our pharma industry, widen out. Up goes the cost, so when the payers get to this, it's stop. This is too expensive, because the measurements are different. For the regulatory, you're looking at safety and efficacy, but the payers are looking at societal improvements. What are we doing about the patient-reported outcomes? More challenges. Communication. When you hear this wonderful science and the progress that it's making, we heard this morning, even from Richard, who's, I think, a wonderful communicator, how much is society going to understand of this? What work are we doing to get society to understand this tremendous advance? And you know, this is going to be top priority when we get to personalized medicine. Top priority. And where are the ethics? What has got to underpin all of this? If you get to the stage of illnesses where it's predictable, what will this do to the legal implications, the insurance implications? We're not taking those debates. We applaud the science, it's leaping ahead. But where is the underpinning of the societal debate? Lagging behind, I think. Now, opportunities. Thank goodness that list is longer. And that absolutely is thanks, Michelle, to a lot of the work that you've done. Working together, 2 simple words, but my goodness, don't we find it hard to do. I think our clinicians learnt it when they established the multidisciplinary teams to help in the hospitals to bring together the nursing, the physiotherapists, the speech therapists, OTs, psychologists, social workers. They understood the importance then, and I think we're beginning to understand that now. I had a really nice week. Last week we went to a Lundbeck function where they presented the Brazen Prize. And I walked along the street with a very nice young scientist, and I said to him, "What's exciting for you?" I didn't get the answer I expected. The answer was, the excitement is because we're working with other disciplines. It's really interesting to work with the engineers. I think this is a wonderful breakthrough. Out of the silos, sharing partnership, working together. Information communication technology. I won't go on about that. I had that down in a list, and I don't think I need to add to anything, having listened to Richard this morning. But I do detect a passion in DG Connect from Robert Madeline and his team, which I welcome, love, and hope that neurology and the brain as a whole will pick up. The increased involvement of social science and the humanities. I'm biased, I'm a sociologist, but this is important. Don't lose those values. They are really, really important. You know, balance is an important word in society. We like our world, our environment to be balanced. We like our bank balances to be balanced. Family relationships need to be balanced, and science needs to be balanced with the humanities, the ethics, and all of this is very fine to do. And here, I'm so pleased Michelle has always involved the patient groups. I like to widen that to society, because it's not actually just about the patient groups. It's about our healthy people in society who are on an earlier pathway and moving, we can hear, somewhat irrevocably towards the patient. In fact, you can't get off this planet without being a patient, so you have to prepare. But we will never involve society unless we start to bring them in on prevention, societal responsibility, the protection of this incredible organ. They have to be involved with this, and I certainly think that we can do that. So I think that's about education. It's about helping society to understand about benefit and risk. And of course, please involve them in the clinical trials. When that causal signal presents in the trials, they will be able to tell you better than anybody else whether that is a tolerable trade-off to the benefit of the medication. So, Ruxandra, a message to you, please. We absolutely support you in every which way you can with the wonderful mantra that's coming out of DG research. Excellent science, innovation, societal impact. Thank you very much.
We always need your energy boost. We will keep it up. I'm now turning to Professor Amouyel to share with us his perspective from the point of view of the joint programming.
Thank you very much for inviting me as a scientist and as a physician. A lot of the previous speakers announced it. We have a major challenge to face, and it was important just to give some figures. Recently, the World Alzheimer's report in 2012 estimated that within the next 40 years, we would have around 680 million new cases before 2050. That's the first figure. The second figure, all over the world, of course, not only in Europe. The second figure, which is probably also important, is that this will cost in 2010-2012 about 1% of the global GDP all over the world. So we have a problem, and it's really time to try to tackle it. But as you know, if it's so simple to tackle it, we should have already found the solutions, but it's not really the case. So the question is, why is it so difficult? First, I think we have to face an organ which is the most complex, which is the brain. And the second point is that as things or an object is complex, we need more and more brains to work on it. That is, as says Mary, we need to work together. And this is not a simple task. Believe me, I'm working in the field of genetics, hunting for years for Alzheimer's genes. I spent years and years to find published artifacts, sometimes very good, high-impact factor journals. And I discovered that just to publish good genes, we need to work together. So pooling data, working together is a major objective in such a complex disease. Some of the diseases have already succeeded in doing that, for instance, in cardiovascular disease, but there's a challenge is far beyond this cardiovascular disease. So the idea was to know how could we help people work together. First, you have the scientists that just always want to work together, alone if possible, but together because this is totally compulsory. The other way is just to transform this collaboration into a governmental objective. And in 2008, the European Commissions raised the ideas of new programs. And I insist on the word, it's not a collaboration, it's a program. That is, how can we program all together research in one field? Of course, we cannot program everything in every field. We need to have some challenge to choose first. And that was the work of the commissions, just to identify challenge. And the very first one, and we are there to thank the commissions and Mrs. Draghia-Akli for that, was neurodegenerative disease, because of all the reasons that I mentioned before. And especially one which was about 60 to 70% of the cases of neurodegenerative disease, which is Alzheimer's disease. So that's why in 2009, 2010, some countries get together just to see how they could interact. And as you know, there is a lot of money which have been put on the table by the commissions, but the biggest amount of money is not there. It's in the countries herself. And in these different countries, the idea is just to avoid duplication, avoid duplications, avoid redundant fundings, avoid a small amount of money put on very big problems. And the idea is just to try to synchronize all this national budget. So it becomes now a very big and long story, which is how can you convince government just to work together in the same directions. First, you have to build up on excellent science. I think this is a major element that can convince everybody. You can do science, but you need to do excellent science. And the idea was first to build together, first the visions. We have all the same problems in the next years or the years to come. Second is to build a strategic agenda, a strategic research agenda. We need that, and we need to build that together because everybody almost has the same problems and the same opportunities. We have to share them. Then once you have do this, you have to prepare what we call an implementation plan. So what to do with the strategy, how to work together, we have to prepare that. I know it's long, it's heavy, it takes time, but it's probably the only way to tackle all this challenge. And this what joint programming initiatives are intended to do. Of course, there's one in the fields we're interested in today, but there are others for climate, for energy, for cultural heritage, and a lot of other topics. The idea is, if we work together, we will go further. Of course, if we work alone, it's always more rapid. But anyway, if we work together, we can move forwards very long. The second point that struck me through the different talks we had from this morning is that everything points out towards complexity. The first talk from Richards was clearly around this, how to deal with complexity with our new tools, with the new IT. And the other one just demonstrated that it was not so simple, because the idea is basically is very simple. You need one biomarkers, you need patient profiling, not too much, let's say it's 5 or 6 groups, and you need 5 or 6 blockbusters for each groups. It's not at all like this for this type of disease. It's very complex, we need to pull this. And there is a bit of discrepancy between this need for complexity and the idea that we could solve that just like we have done for the infectious disease. It's a totally new paradigm, and we need to work on that, both on the university and academic sides, but also in the private and industrial sides. We need to work together in that direction. So the last point really I would like to insist on is how to work together. First, we need to work together for clear added values. We don't need together just because we are good friends, because we are sure we are like this, but really because this has an added values. The best added values we have is that we can mobilize more brains. We need researchers' brains, and brains from patients, but mainly researchers' brains. Second, the other added value is that we can add more money on larger projects. And all these projects should have to be selected only based on excellence and competitiveness. That's the second point, which is important, which is the added value to work together. The third one is really to work together not only within academic groups, but also with industry, because it's only good science that will give good innovations. And I would like to conclude with 2 examples. When a 4-year works on these joint programming initiatives on neurodegenerative disease research, and now we have done our strategic agenda, we have done some tests without some common calls, we try to work together, we had to learn to work together within different countries. We are now trying to align plans, but we are also trying to open up JPND towards other groups. And 2 major ones are industry first, because we need you for innovations, and lay groups and patient associations, because we need the advice of patients, we need the help of patients, and we should never forget that it's thanks to the patient that we can move forward in our research. And the last concrete example of that is that we have modified our scientific advisory boards to have 2 scientific advisors from the industry and 2 scientific advisors from the lay group. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Philippe. And moving to our last speaker, last but not least, Dr. Ring will bring another perspective into working together, the global perspective, which for the field where you're a specialist, but not only, may represent the only way forward.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to participate today. Can't hear? Does that work? So I will struggle right out of the gate, not because I'm jet lagged and just got off a plane from the States, but almost every one of my list of things I wanted to discuss was really well presented and discussed by my fellow panelists. I work for Autism Speaks. We're a patient advocacy and science organization. I'm not going to anchor my comments to just the needs of the autism community, but rather I take a moment to echo a few of the thoughts about the challenges and opportunities we're facing. I will add a little bit of a global twist to it. You know, as I started my career in pharma. I spent over a decade working in psychiatric and neurological drug discovery and development. It's been an interesting transition, but you know, one of the most meaningful things of my current job is working day to day with parents and families who every day are out there, are really on the front lines trying to interpret their reality and translate that ultimately to us in a language that we can help facilitate the research process. And to families, there really is no stack of Nature papers high enough ultimately in terms of impact to their lives that a product on the market ultimately brings to them. And just to echo what has already been said, this end game is absolutely essential to what we are doing. Really fully understanding what it is that we're ultimately trying to do in taking the breakthroughs in science and the innovations in technology that we're all behind, and ultimately converting those into applications that have real life benefit for families. And this is a tricky endeavor for sure. Very, very impressed with the Innovative Medicines Initiative as a model. I think ultimately, in order for us to realize success across different therapeutic areas, we really have to abandon the failed models of the past and really begin to take chances, run experiments, innovate with our approaches to science. And the IMI really has provided a vehicle through which this is possible. And for someone who works in the United States, I'm frequently asked, as we show a very similar slide that Will Sparren threw up previously that showed EU aims, I'm always asked, why can't we do that in the United States? And we could, but we don't. We're simply not innovating in some ways as progressively as being done here. But there are opportunities, and I think opportunities to create synergy between activities across the globe that really have to be contemplated as you build programs like this. One key opportunity / challenge has really already been touched on, and that is in the area of standardization. As we build research programs across the entire value chain of research activity, whether or not you're talking about the development of rodent models for rationalizing new targets all the way through phase 3 clinical development programs, the need for having common data standards and common data management architecture is absolutely critical to ensure that similar activities going on in North America and China and elsewhere have the ability to be harmonized together. In fact, that's one key area of our work package 5 of EU aims, is ensuring that. That synergy is absolutely critical. I think another area of great challenge and opportunity is along the regulatory paths that had been discussed. Not just working within well-trodden regulatory paths in psychiatry and neurology, but for those new areas like autism spectrum disorders, really working not just to build the types of endpoints that really measure clinically meaningful change with treatments, but to innovate the entire model for how regulatory interacts with the research community is needed. And certainly working in the area of a pediatric disorder, I couldn't emphasize this more, a great need for this. The avoidance of duplication of effort could be realized very much in these activities that I've mentioned. I think that's incredibly important to avoid the opportunity costs associated with duplicating efforts across continents. And unfortunately, this continues to be a great challenge. But resources are limited. Whether or not resources are coming from a government agency or from a foundation, funders are struggling to make their research dollar go the full mile. So really these synergies are absolutely critical at this point. Just a few thoughts there I'm sure we'll take some questions from the audience.
Indeed, thank you very much for this introductions from all our panelists, and in the interest of time, and because we are in fact between lunch and discussion, we would like to open it to the public and to your questions, to the panelists, to both of us, on any of the topics of what do you see as challenges or opportunities, and what we can do to foster the process that, in a way or another, each and every one of us addressed. So, here.
Professor Lidson from the RMNRC Newport Network. This is a comment addressed to Ms. Draghia-Akli. I am the principal coordinator of projects submitted for FP7. And my comment is related to the IMI thematic. And I once asked the European Commission, how do you evaluate evaluators? As far as we are concerned, we recognize the ability of evaluators to evaluate simple, straightforward projects, but we openly question their ability to understand, let alone evaluate, complex, avant-garde, integrated interdisciplinary proposals. Now, our expression of interest, thank you. Our expression of interest, one of our expression of interest is the physics of life and the neuroimmunoendocrine system, an integrated interdisciplinary understanding of diseases and healing potential in the human being, explored using novel approaches to therapy. Now, by applying this principle, we developed a very interesting novel protocol, novel therapy for invasive bladder cancer, waiving the need for radical cystectomy and 6-week intensive radiotherapy. Unfortunately, this was just a case study. This was a project in collaboration with St. John's Hospital in Brussels. So in order to propose this protocol as an official alternative to evidence-based medicine, we needed to proceed with a cohort study by applying the same protocol to the same kind of pathology, to the same kind of person at the same stage of bladder cancer. The proposal was... Yes, I've nearly finished. The proposal was turned down by the evaluators for bureaucratic reasons. Now we have been approached by China and the United States for the same protocol. So don't complain if brains go to China or China not remain in Europe. Thank you.
I'm going to be rather brief in my answer because I don't particularly know your case. Our evaluation system is world-renowned. It's recognized internationally. I'm hoping that you are on the list of the evaluators that could be selected for our panels. In the panels that are deemed to receive multidisciplinary proposals, we do have multidisciplinary expertise. Panels are usually composed of 10 to 12 individuals that are actually specialists in the field. I know that you are doing like that, but I'm in charge of the program, so I think that I know who's on my panels. Of course, that proposals have to respond largely to the topics that are put forward. If you are indeed putting forward a proposal in the area of brain research and you're addressing, I don't know, bladder cancer, obviously that would be rejected on the out of scope. But I would very much, if you would like to continue this discussion, take it at the lunch break. And in fact, I would encourage the public to ask relevant questions for the point and to our panelists related to challenges and opportunities for our next programs. So I think that there was a question there.
I'm wondering how much innovation we can do with older medicines that have indications across the field. So if you looked at the different presentations this morning, the existing pharmacologies are relatively similar. So when you find NMDA receptor antagonists here and there, you see comorbidities among all the different indications. And people have mentioned the heterogeneity of patients. So there has been talk in different member countries that it's too big a task to tackle new indications for old drugs. So I'm wondering whether in this context, the combined expertise that you have at hand could be used toward this task. And I could assume that everybody on the panel would have opinions on that.
Our panelists?
So I'll take a crack at this. I don't think there is anyone out there that doesn't see value in either repositioning activities or activities that seek to take assets that have been in clinical development for certain indications where new emerging evidence from research would suggest there may be a biological fit for that. Operationalizing that and incentivizing that for those sponsors or research organizations to do that is probably the real challenge. You know, in the United States, there is a fast-fail model that the NIH has launched, which is really giving contracts to clinical trial networks to take on old assets or assets that had been in clinical development. You might be familiar with this. And there are contracts in these areas that we've talked about today. Schizophrenia, mood and anxiety disorders, and autism are the three contracts from NIMH. It's really from a patient advocacy point of view, an area that we pay a lot of attention to. That is low-hanging fruit from our perspective to share risk from a funding perspective and perhaps paying for the proof of concept trials to get those assets moving forward to an inflection point that a sponsor may be willing to pick it up.
I think my feeling is that there are a lot of programs who are just trying to refurbish drugs and to see how they can remove that from one field to another. I think UK has one big program with AstraZeneca. So it's very punctual. I'm not sure that doing that on a systematic basis due to the complexity of the refurbishing of these drugs could help to find a solution, a systematic way to take all drugs and put that online. But my feeling is that a lot of initiatives are like this. And I think that what was presented by Richard and others this morning, just trying to pool clinical data from companies just to see what can be sorted out as new things or elements that are considered as side effect that could be major effect for other points, participate in this action in general. So the question is, should we do this on a systematic view? But I think it's very complex. I don't know in what way to put money where to do this, or should we leave everybody who has an idea on this and offer him a possibility of blue sky project that could be funded very rapidly just to test this. I have two examples in Alzheimer's. One was about a drug that was published in Science 2 years ago that demonstrated that you could reduce in 78 hours 50% of the amyloid burden. We never heard about it now. And it's a non-drugs, already tested for another indication that could have been tested immediately almost, but nobody published anything else. And I think a lot of papers are just demonstrating that this is an artifact. But anyway.
I think this is where partnership and working together really comes in, because certainly the patients and their families like to have the opportunity to choose. Choice is something that is very precious. I don't think we understand that until we lose it. So choice is very important. But I've had lots of letters telling me that when they go to the pharmacists, they do not get a choice because they're not held in stock. And when you go into why they're not being held in stock, it's because the pharmacist prefers to sell the more expensive drug. So you see, it isn't just about just a straightforward pathway here. There are other ramifications which distort the things that you want to do and we want to receive. There's an awful lot of people in the way. And I think until academia or a really responsible group bring them together, these routes are not as clear as we think they are.
Yeah, just to add up, I think it's important to understand that repositioning of drugs which are or have been on the market basically don't give the company a new grace period. So this means that how would you ever recoup the investment of between €500 million and €1 billion? That's not impossible. And that was exactly why when we as an industry discussed with the FDA to shape that initiative, right, that it's only focused about drugs which actually failed in development and is repositioned, so it still has a possibility to obtain data exclusivity. This being said, I think it's also important to bear in mind that old drugs, and now I mean drugs which has been on the market for decades, typically don't have a safety profile which is acceptable today. And I can mention just one example that as a positive control in our genotox studies, we use a drug which has been on the market for more than 50 years, but which nevertheless are positive, meaning that it induces genotox very nicely, but it's sold on the market. It has been there for, well, more than 50 years. So there's a few complications about this repositioning. It's not that easy.
Thank you. There was another question there.
The repositioning of drugs can't be systematic. It's necessary to understand the mechanisms, and then you look at the drugs that are acting. I have just a question. The brain can be reduced to neurons. There are also, glial cells, microglial, and astrocytes. And we have an experience we have done with CEA Life Science in Fontenay. We explained the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And in fact, the major problem comes from the astrocytes that are killing the neurons. So if you don't take into account, you can't explain. And the association of a drug that is playing on the connexins, that means on the astrocytes, the gap junction, and psychotropes, we were able to reduce the dosage from 5 to 20 times the psychotrope. So we patented it in 2009, and now a company is starting, the development of this association. So it means that if you think of the brain of the global things and you take into account all the population, you understand mechanisms, then it's possible to develop, interesting associations. If not, it's an awful situation. Thank you.
I think I can only approve that, what you said, and to extend that towards other type of cells, just like microglia and immune system, which are probably very, very important in the brain disease also. So fully agree on that.
One more question? Yes, you.
Jackie Beckman from Lausanne. We all agree that EMI is doing fantastic work, so I'm not there to say anything bad, and I thank some of the comments that were made here, particularly the arguments against siloization and collaboration. I myself have been working on the autism field, and we know that it's associated with metabolic syndrome, or it could be associated with metabolic syndrome, obesity, and other stuff as well. What I missed today, we heard fantastic groups working, fantastic networks working on different brain diseases. But where's the interaction between these groups? I'd like to hear more about that, because I'm sure that there's interconnectivity, and I didn't hear anything about it.
I don't think anybody heard that.
Yes.
Yeah, but if I may, just one point in the new IMI programs, I think there are some interaction.
Yeah, I don't think I heard that.
Oops,
I don't think I heard that.
You can't hear me?
I don't think people over here heard that.
So the question was, what about the interaction among the various IMI projects? So the presentations this morning, each and every one have pointed out the successes of individual projects. So I think that Michel would like to kickstart that answer.
Question. I can tell you that this afternoon all the brain project of IMI will meet together, I think, with actually the EMA representative to discuss what could be done together. And obviously you heard that there are some common pathway between the different diseases. So they are really very keen to work together, and they are starting to do it efficiently.
And I think this is really one strength of the IMI mechanism, is it's, particularly in the area of CNS research, many of the same EFPIA companies are present across these different calls and these different programs. Just evidence as I was listening this morning, PharmCog and NewMeds using the same touch screen assay for rodent work. I believe NewMeds and EU AIMS have touch points along the genetics area. I think these are really, the fact that EFPIA is embedded into this mechanism so wholeheartedly. Some of the same departments are with their individual groups are touching on each of these different groups. It's hard not to achieve that kind of synergy.
And I serve, you can imagine, I'm not a scientist, but I'm on the scientific committee. And the agendas there are really, they're wide, the scope is wide. And what impresses me is that it's things like, you know, the proper political words about, you know, patient involvement, working together, trust. All these can become sort of political words that you know you should be talking about. But I can assure you, I see it implemented there. It really is, because after all, trust is so important. Transparency is a weasel word. That doesn't matter. It's the trust, and the trust is there, and Michelle Goldman insists, as does the chair, Christian Noy, that they are very central to the discussions.
So, before ending this panel, I would like to ask all the panelists very briefly to give their perspective in what would be the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity that we do have, not only in making this IMI a success, but in putting forward and bringing to a very successful pass a second innovative medicine initiative. So the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity. So, Dr. Ring?
I'd say definitely we've just hit on it. I mean, I think the natural arrival at the last question really highlights probably the greatest opportunities moving forward are realizing programs into the future that couple into the existing and leverage the existing programs to realize a much greater potential. And, you know, one area of great challenge in the CNS area that I have to throw out is really the penultimate challenge facing the entire field is realizing a more precise, objective way of diagnosing disorders of the CNS, moving beyond observational-based approaches. And that emphasizes the future of biomarker discovery and validation, which is likely to feature across all future programs moving forward.
I think one of the greatest challenges is how we manage the aging population. Not because I have a self-interest in it, but also because we know from the economics that 20% of the population is absorbing 80% of the health costs. So you have to do something about managing the elderly, because otherwise they're pulling away from the children and the rest of society. So I think it really is, and I like DG Sanko's, that they have this very strong idea of if you could manage 2 more years of healthy living, this would benefit the patient, the family, and society. So I would put the aging up there to get them through those last years on our planet as not only as pleasantly as possible for them and the families, but also economically the best we can manage. Otherwise, other segments of our populations are going to suffer terribly.
Philippe?
Since this morning, we have seen that we need clearly to increase our number of patients, to better know them, to increase our expertise, to increase our fundings, just to tackle all this big challenge. And I think clearly IMI did this very well for this first phase, that is, we learn to work together. Now, I clearly think that IMI 2 will help to work together definitely and bring some answers to the questions we are raising all over, actually. Thank you.
I can take a stab to it also and start with what, from my personal perspective, I see the biggest challenge, which is the resistance to the implementation of innovation. Very often we do have solutions, but unfortunately they are not arriving to those that need them, to the patients. So I think that one of the areas that we will need to thoroughly address would be to see how we can clear the way for this innovation to reach all of us. And I think that here is also the opportunity. We have seen how an extraordinary, unprecedented type of collaboration has been set up, and IMI is a perfect example. I think that bringing and continuing to bring the excellence in science in this collaboration will help us pave the way to bring innovation to patients.
Yeah, and finally my step. I think I have two challenges which are also opportunities. The first one is culture. So what we have seen in IMI is really that we all learned to work together. I think this has been mentioned earlier. But I think it's really breathtaking in a way that previous opponents are now sitting around the same table and realize that they have the same goal here in life. Maria, you're laughing. I like it. But I think it's really what is going to bring us forward, that we can do this. I can also say from experience with IMI that we still do not have all the stakeholders around the table, and I hope we will manage to get that arranged in the next round of IMI, because that is needed. The other thing I would mention here is really political awareness about brain diseases. It's not there. It's simply not there. Why isn't it there? I think stigma is one of the explanations, but not all. I think the majority, because it's the societal CFOs which are, running the countries these days. CFOs means finance ministers. And they don't see the cost of brain diseases in the primary healthcare system, so they don't really care. So I think this is the challenge, and this is also the opportunity. When this awareness comes around, then we'll be able to do something about the problems. Thank you.